Okay, look, words are back. Okay, let's see what I don't know what's wrong with this. Okay. So now there'll probably be 2 recordings posted for this lecture. So we'll see how it all works out. The other recording, I stopped it, it's saved. Now there's a second recording. Okay, so we were talking about the language of the cytoskeleton, and this is where we ended the other day. We talked about nucleation, which was the creation of a stable starting unit allowing for rapid polymer growth. And then we spoke about the critical concentration, and that's the relationship between free monomer concentration in the cell. There's only so much monomer, and it's either going to be used up, making a polymer, or it's going to be present as a monomer. And that there's a relationship between that and whether or not you're going to have growth or shrinkage of a polymer. And so the critical concentration is when the on and off rates are equal. So you're going to have a monomer added to the polymer, or you'll have it leaving the polymer, and that's when you have shrinkage. And so when you're at that steady state, that's your critical concentration. And we watched the nucleation video, so you can watch it again. Let's see, respond. Maybe in an hour. I'm getting angry at my computer. Yeah. So, good. Got Vanna White here. Is Vanna still around? Yeah. She retired. She's like probably over 50 now. Okay, so nucleation. So we're talking about nucleation. So this is this initial step required for filament formation. Does this look like a growth curve to you guys? A little bit, right? So I always think of this as a growth curve. And so instead of growing your bacteria, you're growing your polymer. So here you're seeing you've got your actin subunits, and they could interact or not. Eventually, you form a stable oligomer, and then, sorry, I'm getting really busy. What's that button for? So then you get this growth, and eventually you'll hit your steady state at your critical concentration, and that's when you've got your on and off equal. Are you guys going to kill me if I take a break?
No.
Are
you hungry?
I'm hungry, yep. And I had a lot of coffee, so the two together are not good. I'll be okay. Just give me a sec. Okay. So we get this nucleus formation, and then we'll get growth of our actin filaments, and then you've got your stable. That's your steady state, which is your equilibrium, which is at your critical concentration. So just like what we were saying before, subunits can assemble spontaneously, but it's unstable. And so they'll disassemble easily until this stable aggregate or nucleus is formed, and then the filament will grow until it reaches its steady state. So if you have a nucleus, then you can bypass that lag phase. So remember, this looks like a growth curve. You've got that lag phase until that nucleus forms. So you can imagine if you put in a whole lot of bacteria into a culture, it's going to quickly go into your exponential growth. And so I always like to relate that to this because it makes sense to me, hopefully to you. So if you put in a nucleus, then you're going to go straight into that exponential growth. So there are a lot of proteins. I keep talking about these accessory proteins. So there are a number of proteins in the cell, and they have the function of bypassing this nucleation step. How do you think they might work? What do you think they might do? So much you have a protein. Yep.
Nucleus so it doesn't have to have a
Right, so they act to bind to, they act to bind to monomers and bring them together and form that nucleus. And so it doesn't have to happen randomly. Exactly. And so we're going to learn about a bunch of nucleating proteins. Okay, so let's continue with our language of the cytoskeleton. So we've got plus and minus ends. Actin and tubulin polymers have two ends, and so this is really talking about more in the test tube. Once we're in the cell, things are regulated, so things are going to be a little bit different, but generally you can think of actin and tubulin polymers as having two ends at which monomers add and leave at different rates. And that's dependent on the critical concentration. The plus end is going to be where you're having rapid addition, and your minus end is going to be where you're having rapid leaving. And so this is showing a microtubule. That would be what the cross section looks like, but here just looking at it straight on. Here's your microtubule and your minus end and your plus end. And notice your plus end is growing. So your plus end is always a growing end. Another concept to understand is treadmilling. This is when your critical concentration. So when you're talking about critical concentration, think of it as like a binding constant, I guess. Think of it as a concentration that's related to each end of your polymer. So it's not the concentration in the cell, it's a concentration on either end at which either above it you're going to grow or below it you're going to shrink. So with treadmilling, that's when your critical concentration at your minus end is greater than your critical concentration at your plus end. And so that means that since it has a high critical concentration, you're more likely to be below it. You're more likely to have leaving at your minus end, and you're more likely to have adding at your plus end. And so what it's going to do, it's going to look like your polymer is kind of moving, but really what's happening is you're rapidly leaving from your minus end, and you're rapidly adding to your plus end, and it gives an impression of movement. And I'll show you a picture that should kind of help with that. Yes, you leave generally, leaving from your minus end, adding to your plus end. Okay, so here's another concept. Right now it's just a bunch of concepts, and they're going to all come together. I promise. Just get these concepts down. So another concept to understand is there's ATP or GTP, which right now I'll refer to as NTP. So NTP is associated with your monomer, and you can only add your monomer to your polymer in your T-bound state. But once you're in your polymer, you get this hydrolysis of T to D, and then you get, then you're more likely to leave. So you could think of it as binding affinity is stronger when you're T-bound, and once you're D-bound, you're more likely to dissociate. Another thing of which we spoke about the other day, dynamic instability. So this is just that concept that microtubules can grow and shrink, and they alternate between, in this example, they alternate between the two states of growing and shrinkage, and it's dependent upon what's called a GTP cap. So remember, your monomers are added in the T-bound state, and after they're added, they'll slowly hydrolyze to D-bound, right? So what happens is the cap or the top, your plus end of your microtubule will have an excess of GTP-bound tubulin, and that's because it's not that the monomer, it's not immediately added and hydrolyzed to GTP. It takes a little while, so there's a lag. And so what will happen is when there's a high concentration of monomer in the cell, you'll get a lot of addition of monomer to your growing microtubule, and it'll be so rapid that, and the GTP hydrolysis won't have caught up. So you'll end up with this GTP cap. But then over time, you'll get GTP hydrolysis, and then you'll get loss of your GTP cap. So let's say you add a whole bunch of monomers, you have this huge GTP cap, but then the concentration of your monomer in the cell is going to go down. And so then you're going to be, more likely to start leaving, because now that your concentration is low, then you're below your critical concentration, and you're going to start shrinking. So then you lose, then GTP hydrolysis catches up, you lose your GTP cap, and then you get what's called catastrophe, which was always my favorite term in learning about the cytoskeleton. Catastrophe, how can you forget? It's a catastrophe. So then you get this rapid shrinking. So it's saying that you have formation of your polymer from subunits. So with microtubules, you form broken tubulin subunits that are made of alpha-beta tubulin heterodimers. And so you've got alpha tubulin bound to beta tubulin. They're both bound to GTP, but only the beta tubulin can hydrolyze GTP. And they assemble head to tail. And that's what we're talking about with the GTP cap. We're talking about how the bulk of your, if you have a GTP cap, then the number of your tubulin dimers that have been added will still be GTP bound. They won't have GTP hydrolysis yet. People always think GTP cap means there's a GTP bound to the top of your microtubule. That's not the GTP cap. It's the most plus and subunits are GTP bound because GTP hydrolysis has not happened yet. It hasn't happened yet. Questions? So, microtubules. So they're hollow. They have a cylindrical structure. They're built from 13 parallel protofilaments. So a protofilament is one of these lines of subunits. So they're made from alternating alpha-beta tubulin subunits. And then there's these multiple contact between subunits that make these microtubules stiff and difficult to bend. They have a long persistence length, so they can get very long and still be stable. They're the stiffest, straightest structural element found in most animal cells. So, like we were saying before, microtubules have structural polarity. So they have a plus end and a minus end. So here's your structure again, alpha tubulin and beta tubulin, and they're assembling head to tail. And the plus end is going to have your beta at the top. A plus end is also where you most rapidly have addition of your subunits. Actin monomers, they assemble the same way. They're very similar, actin and tubulin, in how they're regulated. So as you are studying this, I want you to be drawing parallels between the two and comparing. And we're going to talk about all these accessory proteins that regulate, and usually we'll go back and forth between the two because there are accessory proteins that do the same thing in actin and in tubulin. Alpha-beta tubulin dimer, where you have just the beta tubulin can hydrolyze GTP, and in actin, it's ATP bound, not GTP, ATP, and it's not a dimer, it's a monomer. But still, there's structural polarity based just on the structure of the actin monomer, and it will assemble also and have plus end and minus end. And same concept, you're most rapidly adding to the plus end, most rapidly leaving from your minus end. Any questions? Okay. So, actin, I keep on kind of talking about this critical concentration. I'm going to kind of go back and forth about this for a little bit. Actin and tubulin filaments grow. Okay, let's just think about that for a minute. People get very confused about critical concentration, and I think it's because in the book they talk about it mathematically, which I guess for some people that's very easy to understand, but for other people they see something else as an equation, and they're like, well, I can't understand this. So try not to get overwhelmed by greater and lesser and stuff like that. Just think conceptually that you've got monomer and then you've got polymer, and depending on how much monomer there is in solution, you're more apt to grow or shrink. Okay? So dissociation or association is often greater at one end than at the other, right? So association is always greater at the plus end, and dissociation is always greater at the minus end. One end can elongate faster than the other, and one end can shrink faster than the other. The more dynamic end is always the plus end. So that's the end that is usually growing rapidly. So cells, so why do you care about all this? Well, cells use this. Cells they couple unfavorably energetic processes to this spontaneous process. They can push or pull an attached load. Elongating microtubules can push out membranes, plasma membranes. Shrinking microtubules can segregate mitotic chromosomes. Elongating actin filaments can help push out the leading edge of motile cells. So this is related to the cell and all the cellular processes and cell movement. And so I want you to try not to get bogged down with all this language I'm giving you, but you need to know it so you can understand the accessory proteins and how they modulate cytoskeletal dynamics. Questions? Yeah, so cells basically use this. Okay, so there's this concept of this dynamic instability, this growth and shrinkage, right? And so the cells use that to move things. So you can move the cell forward with the growth of actin. You can segregate your chromosomes with the shrinkage of microtubules. And so coupling means you kind of using the same energy for another process. Okay, so I said this before. Here's another way to look at it. The T form, so ATP or GTP bound monomer, it's going to always add to the filaments, and the D bound form is more likely to leave. And so there are different on and off rates to think about here. But really, what you need to think about is the T bound form is going to bind, and your D bound form doesn't bind as strongly, so it's more likely to leave. Oh, here we go again. I'm just going to leave. What if I just walked out? Would you guys come with me? Okay. Let's see, what was I trying to say with this slide? So this is, again, we're talking about critical concentration. So just understand the concept. The critical concentration is different for the plus ends and the minus end. And usually, well, so let's take a look over here. I think I've got, I'm sure it's funny, it has nothing to do, this is the really annoying thing, is my PowerPoint is fine, right? Everyone who has it up, right, it's totally fine. It's just that, like, something's happening with my computer. Apparently what happens with PowerPoint is if the memory that the PowerPoint program is using is not available, or not enough memory is available, then the first thing to go is images, and a lot of these are images. Anywho, it's so annoying. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so let's talk about critical concentration and treadmilling. Okay, so remember, treadmilling occurs at the concentration above, at concentrations above the plus end critical concentration and below the minus end critical concentration. So your plus end and your minus end are both going to have their own critical concentrations, and then there is a concentration of monomer in the cell, right? And so at your minus end, when you're above, basically your critical concentration is 0. That's when you have no growth and no shrinkage. So there's no change. Your on and off rates are the same for that end. And same plus end and minus end. But when you're between your critical concentrations for your plus and your minus end, then you'll get, that's when you'll get your treadmilling. So when the critical concentration for your T-bound monomer is less than the concentration in the cell, and the critical concentration of your D-bound monomer is greater than the concentration in the cell, that's when treadmilling is going to happen. Okay, so this is resulting from a net assembly. Oh, look, everything should look on this slide. That's exciting. It occurs from a net assembly at the plus end. So you're getting addition at the plus end, and in that disassembly at the minus end. And so what this basically looks like, looks like something is missing here. And you're leaving at the other end, and it makes it look like the whole thing is moving. And so I want you to just kind of keep this in mind as we start talking about actin polymerization and cell movement. It's going to become more apparent. So this shows the treadmilling behavior of a microtubule in a cell. And so what they did is they fluorescently labeled tubulin, and they're following it over time. So here's time 0, and here's 98 seconds, and this is time-lapse photography of it, right? And so here's your green at time 0. There's your microtubule. And so the treadmilling that's happening is the one that these guys at this end, at this minus end, are leaving. And then there are tubulin dimers being added at the plus end. And that happens, and it gives the appearance of the whole entire microtubule moving. Okay? Yeah. Yeah.
So treadmill, are we adding stuff on here?
What you're doing is you're adding to the front end and leaving from the back end. It makes the whole thing look like it's moving.
So it's not really.
No, it's not really moving. It's growing. It's growing at one end and shrinking at the other end, so it gives that appearance. Yeah. Yeah, so you're constantly adding new subunits to the plus end, and you're constantly losing subunits from the minus end, and that gives that appearance that it's moving, which is why it's called treadmilling. Yes, the subunits don't get degraded or anything. The subunits get recycled, yeah.
That's like actively moving forward and still being in position.
Yes, that's why I'm trying to get this concept there. It's changing position. It's not like the microtubule is walking. It's moving. It is moving forward. It is moving forward, but it's moving forward by growing at one end and shrinking at the other end. And so that gives that kind of, like, if you think about a treadmill and how a treadmill works, it's kind of rolling forward, right? And so as you're rolling forward, it's what was here is coming over here, right? But what was here is leaving. Maybe. I know, I always lose people on it. But what I'm hoping is just kind of read about it and think about it, and we'll bring it up again a few more times. But what I'm hoping is that when we start to get to actin polarization and movement of the cell, it'll become more intuitive. Okay, any other questions about this? I'm sure you do. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so given the critical concentration, so like, is it more like if you have that 3 monomer to bind on everything, that's what more like so more free monomer available starting with,
Yeah.
dimerization or whatever, like you have like one thing that's aggregated with another that is more likely to bind to that.
Yeah, it's really about numbers of monomer. If you've got more of it, it's more likely to bind. If you have less of it, it's more likely to leave. It's this kind of equilibrium, right?
No, you don't have like any polymer.
Well, if you have no polymer, then you can't add anything, which is the importance of nucleation. Right? So if you have your nucleus, so that's your starting point. If you have a ton of monomer, you're going to add monomer, right? But then when you've got this concept of of nucleotide hydrolysis, which controls the binding strength. And so there's kind of two things going on. P or ATP is hydrolyzed, you're likely to leave. But that happens slower than addition, so really your stuff looks most close to your minus end is going to be G down, and so that's why it's more likely to leave for a minute. Okay? And so the whole thing with the critical concentration is that the behavior or the critical concentration is very different at either end due to the fact that T-bound binds differently than D-bound. Okay? Okay. Oh, look, I think I have a video. Let's see what happens to my computer when we play this. Can we call OTS and ask them for a new computer? It's 2011, right? That's not that old. Apparently they're replacing 2010 computers right now. Let's see. We're going to see what happens here. I think I need to get rid of all my movies. It's coming. I can't do that.
Are you able to go to the 1 o'clock on Tuesday? Just because I have to go back home after school?
That's fine.
It would just be this Tuesday.
Yeah, it doesn't make a difference. Yeah.
Okay. Is this the same class?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
Oh, wow.